Welcome, everybody. My name is Blaze, and I'm here joined with Liam Sofias. And today we're going to be looking at the astrological alignments in the forecast for the month of February 2022. Welcome again, Liam.
Hi again. I'm quite excited to look at February. We initially didn't look at it very thoroughly, but now we've actually come and seen quite a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, we like spent some time talking about it. I've spent some time just like looking at the transits for February, like with clients and everything, and I'm like, damn, this is a big month. Like this is not what we thought it was originally. Um, and so yeah, I'm really excited to look at everything with everyone today. So to kind of start off the forecast, we're going to take a little bit of an overview of the month of what we can expect for the astrological transits. So I have a calendar here that'll show what's going on. So on the first of the month, we have the new moon in Aquarius. Then as we go into the third of the month, Mercury will finally station direct after being retrograde since January 14th. The following day, the sun will conjoin Saturn, creating the Saturn Cazimi. And that happens on the same day that Mars sextiles Jupiter in Pisces. As we go into the next week, Mercury will conjoin Pluto on the 11th. And then on the 14th, Mercury will then enter back into the sign of Aquarius, where it entered on January 2nd. We come to a full moon on February 16th, on the same day that Mars conjoins Venus. Then on the 18th, Pisces season begins. And at first glance, this kind of looks like doesn't look like too much of an intense week, but we got some interesting stuff building around this time. So I don't know, what are your thoughts, Liam, just on February as just a whole month? Like what has changed in your perspective of February that's made you think like, oh shit, like this is kind of like big or important?
Yeah, I feel like both the fourth of the month and then also the full moon are really key dates, which are kind of easy to overlook. But we have a lot of different planetary alignments all happening on the same exact day in both cases. And so I think that that's something that's very interesting to see how many things layer up together where on each day it's going to be different, but we have this confluence of multiple astrological signatures. And so what I think is interesting is if you were to have a horary chart or an election or your own transits, if you're looking for things to connect together, we see there's two dates in the month where a lot of those things do connect together. And so I think that's something really interesting about February.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this full moon is it's a huge full moon for the year. Like, and I think one of the things that is also setting the tone for the month as well is that Mars has just entered Capricorn from January. And so throughout the entirety of February is Mars in Capricorn, and then March is Mars in Aquarius. So even though Mars didn't ingress this month, Mars, as of recording this, today is Friday, January 28th, on Venus's day, Venus hour too.
Yeah.
Uh, um, as of recording, Mars has just ingressed earlier this week, and that's going to set the tone for this month, because one of the things that'll happen on the full moon is that this is when Mars conjoins Venus,
Yeah.
which I think, I don't know, it's a very, like, just 2 days after Valentine's Day. It looks like a very spicy Valentine's Day this year. It looks hot, it looks pot fiery, it looks sexy. It's filled with a lot of passion. So I think my initial thoughts on what made me change from February being a kind of important month, like a kind of like lackluster month, like we originally wrote it off as like it's one of the chiller months of the year. And now one of the things I think in my perspective that has changed is that I realized that Venus is coming down from her retrograde. So she's stationed direct. Actually, will be tomorrow on Saturday, the 29th. Venus will station direct. And Mars at this point, because Venus is so slow in the sky, is faster than Venus. And so throughout these months of the week, or throughout these weeks of the month, Mars will just be moving through the sign of Capricorn, and then Mars eventually catches up to Venus, and then will pass Venus by the 16th. And so there's this interesting tango that Venus and Mars are like getting into, and like things get complicated, things get tricky, things get they go back and forth with Mars and Venus. There's like a lot of like, oh my God, it's like, when you feel just like a lot of sexual tension in the air, and
Yeah.
you're just like, there's some tension that is not being addressed that needs to come up. There's like this orgasmic climax literally on the full moon that happens when Mars conjoins Venus. And it's very interesting because once Mars conjoins Venus, Venus is pretty slow by this time period, but Mars transits, whenever Mars hits like a planet, especially through conjunction, it tends to energize that planet. It tends to like add some fuel, add some fire. I think of Mars transits as like striking a match on that planet, or it's like it's striking a lighter or something. Because Mars likes, Mars is the red planet, the fiery planet. And so what I thought was very interesting is in this dance of Venus and Mars, Mars is energizing or striking Venus with the match. And then Venus becomes energized enough to where she picks up speed and is chasing Mars through the entirety of the month until March, when Venus will officially catch up to Mars and be at regular speed, and then pass Mars completely. So I thought that was very important for this week, because usually, or not this week, for the month, because usually the slower moving planets will receive aspects from the faster moving planets. And Mars will never really make an aspect to Mercury, for example, because Mars is the slower moving planet. But when you get instances like this where a planet is coming down from a retrograde and is actually a lot slower than it usually is, it kind of raises an eyebrow that Mars is making the aspect to Venus when usually it's the other way around.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about them coming together here is actually quite like multidimensional, because not only are we looking at a different type of planetary speed that's a little bit abnormal to see Venus slow while, we have Mars fast. We're also looking at things like the dignity that they have and the phases they're in, because when we look at their dignity, they both are actually in a place where they have dignity, where we have Venus by triplicity and Mars by exaltation. And so while Mars can normally be a destructive influence or can try to tear things down, it's actually going to be softened by Capricorn and softened by Venus. And so both Mars is energizing Venus, but Venus is also softening Mars and making it a lot more constructive. And so that energy is going to be a little bit more focused and better applied to tasks, rather than something that's going to be more rash and unthought out. We have a slower Mars, a slower more philosophically, because its speed is going to be fast. But by being in a home of Saturn, it's going to be a little bit more rational, a little bit more slow, and a little bit more methodical put together. And then paired with Venus, we actually see that that's ripe for construction and like for bringing things together and into an image. I know a lot of people that I've been talking with really want to use this for like working out or going back to a gym or something related, because what we have is the aesthetics of Venus and the energy of Mars and them kind of coming together. They're also both what are called like nocturnal planets. And that usually has to deal with things like the body or fortune or things that are material. And so we have this really constructive alignment between a planet that's normally a little bit haphazard and then Venus, and they're going to come together to actually make something very practical and applicable in our lives.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's very interesting that that I think this is going to be the first time that actually the lesser malefic and benefic are conjoining since the greater benefic and malefic conjoined in 2021. Am I right on that, or is that
Yeah. No, because they actually conjoined in Leo.
That's right, they did conjoin in
Yeah.
Leo, so I'm wrong about that. No,
Oh, it's not.
but I think it's interesting that we're getting another conjunction here, though,
Mhm.
in the sign of Capricorn, and actually even Leo is being highlighted on the same day too, which is even more interesting. I think that Mars being in the sign of Capricorn is really interesting because it does characterize the month as well. Because again, like you said, Mars is in its exaltation, and a lot of that original philosophy behind an exalted planet is that it's a lot more. It's said to be in its kingdom actually,
Mhm.
and that the planet is lifted up or put towards a state of increase and constructive support. Specifically with the malefics, they're a lot more constructive and supported when they're in their exaltation, but they
Yeah.
also have a lot of strength as well too. And so when we have Mars with a lot of strength, I think that, I mean, someone who has Mars in Capricorn in my natal chart, I think the way I've seen this come up is that there's a very like determined approach to getting something done. And there's also like, I think one of the things that Mars in Capricorn is really good at is like mentally mapping out what it needs to do and what it needs to go through. Because one of the things that we actually are going to talk about is that Mars is in the sign of its contra antitia, to where it'll be stationing retrograde later in the year. And essentially, like, the contra antitia is that It's kind of like a complicated thing, but not really. But it's almost kind of like a pancake, where the zodiac is like a pancake, and then with the contrantitia, it's flipped across the ascend, not the it's the Aries Libra axis of the equinox points. And so if you were to like map on one side of the zodiac, for example, like the Gemini side, the mirror point of that would be in Capricorn, which would be kind of like an opposition in a way. And so,
Yeah.
or it would behave like an opposition. And so I think it's interesting that Mars is very like kind of battle strategy oriented here, and Mars wants to get stuff done. Mars wants to think practically about how to handle its solutions, or how to handle and achieve what it desires. And I think Mars being exalted is a sign that we do get to achieve what we desire, especially when Mars comes to Venus. We really become energized and motivated to go after what we want. And one of the things I was talking about on Twitter is that, especially with this full moon, it's like the heart, like the full moon is also like on Regulus within like a 4-degree orb too. So you throw that in there, it's even crazier. I think there's so much having to deal with the heart and what we're passionate about, what we want, what makes us feel good, and like you said, on a very physical level, because these planets are nocturnal. They're associated with material things and tangible things. And I love that idea of like sculpted, like body sculpting, or like trying to get, your image and your physical image the way you want it to look like. And I think there's a lot of like identity like stuff coming up here, especially with this full moon. And like, what does your heart want? What energizes you? What fills you with passion? It seems like this is all Leo stuff, of course. And I think the spotlight is also put on ourselves as well too, as to, again, are we concealing ourselves from, are we like, what are the ways in which we're blocking ourselves from getting the things that we want to get? What are the ways that we're kind of ignoring the heart in a way? How do we ignore our heart? And I think this Venus Mars conjunction really just provides an opportunity to like go after something that you love, or go after and take initiative to bring into the things that bring you passion and enjoyment into your life materially.
Yeah, and with Venus having just been retrograde, we see that there's that reevaluation of the things that we desire. And then now we're actually looking at, not only have things been reevaluated, but now that we are stationed direct and we're moving in a specific direction, we're actually being energized to determine the actual end goal, and to not
Yeah.
just think about what we want, but actually to put motion into it. And Mars has been linked to motion throughout the centuries. And so what we have here is this emotion, which is powered by something desired. And so that there's actually quite a lot of like energy there that can be constructed and used, harnessed and applied. And then everything you said about the full moon, which is happening like synchronized with this, is actually
Synchronized.
very important here, because it's not just that they're coming together, but this is under the backdrop of a full moon. And that full
Yeah.
moon is when we have this complete like understanding where the sky is completely illuminated by the moon. And so what we have here is this full realization, and that full realization can be applied towards what we want to direct and materialize in our life going forward. And that's going to be implemented as these planets speed up and meet again in the future, because like you said in the beginning, that Venus is going to speed up and then come back to Mars. And so this is just like step one on a 2-part plan to get whatever we want. And we can either work with that or not. We can ignore that and just, do nothing, or we can
Yeah.
actually apply it into our lives and try to take that first step.
Yeah, and I think Mars in Capricorn is it's thinking about the long game. Like the way I've like been recently describing this Venus retrograde. It's like there's a construction project we have going on, especially in Capricorn.
Mm,
There's a construction project, and Venus retrograde is like, we need to change the design a little bit. Maybe we put this over here. Maybe we adjust the proportions and everything. And then Mars are the construction workers. Mars is the people who are going to build that cathedral. Mars is the people who are going to build that skyscraper and bring this image to life, pretty much. I don't know, I think Mars in Capricorn, it's definitely very work oriented during this time period, and it wants to Mars has a goal it wants to accomplish. Mars is willing to take a lot of time to do it. I mean, Mars only visits Capricorn every 2 years approximately. So I think this February is a great time to think about, in the broader context of this Mars cycle, what do you want to accomplish 2 years by now? where do you want to be the next time Mars is in Capricorn, and you have this energy to, think more about the future, put things into motion, and think about what plan of action is the most sustainable as well too, because Capricorn really cares about, like, Capricorn and Aquarius, they care about sustainability and longevity. So it's not so much you're trying to, like, burn yourself out and give all your all at once. Mars in Capricorn is very much like, no, we're gonna keep a steady flame that'll last for centuries in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, that's what this month is all about. And so, we can go now probably into each week by week where we see the different ways that that theme is going to materialize on that weekly basis. And with the first week having Mercury station direct, that's going to be probably the first step as we dip our toe into this water, where we are now able to redirect our mind, our plans, the mental structures that we have to get ready for our emotion, our movement, and our materialization. So that first step definitely happens in that first week where Mercury stations direct, and that's just going to help us get there. But then we definitely have that very chaotic Friday the 4th to look at.
Yeah, that Friday the 4th is very interesting. Yeah, so to kind of like start off just like the beginning of this, we start off on Tuesday with the new moon in Aquarius, and it's also going to be the same day that the moon conjoins Saturn. On the 2nd, the moon will enter Pisces. It'll make a sextile to Mars and conjoin Jupiter during that transit. It'll also make a sextile to Venus, conjoin Neptune, and then on the 3rd, Mercury will station. Then the moon will actually apply to Mercury, who is just stationed direct. And then as we come into Friday, Mars will actually be making an aspect to Jupiter. It'll make a sextile to Jupiter. The moon will then enter Aries, and then the sun will conjoin Saturn, and it'll create the Saturn Cazimi. Then as we go into Saturday, the moon will square Mars and Venus, and then come to sextile the sun and Saturn, which is very interesting because like the moon is passing over the degrees that of Mars and Venus, trying to like unite them in a way. And then the moon is passing over the sun and Saturn, who is now separating. And then as we go into the 6th, the moon will square Mercury and then enter Taurus by the end of the week. So we start off this week with the moon in a fixed sign, and then we get it in a fixed sign at the end too, which I think is interesting because that new moon on the 1st, it does look like one of the things I was thinking about with the full moon is not the full moon, the new moon, is that there is something that is like being purged, or there's something that is kind of like, I think of it like a structure that isn't sustainable, or there's something that we maybe need to, like you said, or you said earlier, like discard or throw away. And I think a lot of that is characterized by the fact that Saturn is coming to the end of its cycle in this beginning of the week. And so this new moon is very Saturnian, it's very heavy. And I forgot exactly what degree it's on. Do you remember what degree it's on?
I don't remember the degree, but I do definitely agree with everything you've been saying, because the other day I was looking at that and I tweeted out, because there was this end of the cycle of Saturn is going to show that these bondages or chains or habits that we have, that's all Saturn like themes, those things that are currently in our lives, we have a time in which that's going to be coming to the end of a cycle. And so every year the sun's going to conjoin Saturn, it's going to obscure its light. You won't be able to see Saturn in the sky. And when that happens, we have like an entry point to mark out time. And that is really useful for us to understand these cycles of Saturn, where we're looking at what is our relationship to our habits? What is our relationship to the things that we are bound by or committed to? And so this kind of gives us an opening in the beginning of the month to say, okay, what are the things I'm committed to? What are the things I've chosen to bind myself with? And do I want to keep those habits the same or change them? And because as the moon comes there and conjoins Saturn, it's saying, okay, here's the point to make that final decision. What do we want to keep or discard in that cycle, which will last for another year?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with everything. And I think the big thing about Saturn is that there's something that feels like stale in a way, or something that feels kind of like brittle. Like, I think Saturn is getting like, it's like really combust by this time. Like Saturn is very hot, very dry, and is being burnt up by the sun. And I think of it as like those sand cookies, for example, like when you pick them up
Mm,
on the beach and like they look like they're solid form, and then when you touch them, they just kind of crumble into
mm,
dust.
mhm,
And I think I'll like there's this idea of either detachment and letting go from something, but also making a commitment to start something new as well too, which is like that what that transition from the first to the fourth is about, because we go from the new moon, which is I guess like a moon Kazemi, pretty much. We go from moon Kazemi to Saturn Kazemi.
yeah.
And I don't know, the detachment really like comes up with Saturn, especially with Aquarius. Like I always see that like idea like of Aquarian moons, for example. Like I always see this with them is like they always feel like kind of blocked or detached in some sort of way. Sometimes I see it with their mother. Like I have a few friends
Mm,
who have that like kind of cold or distant relationship, and I think there's this feeling of like there's a lot of coldness here, or needing to move away from something with the moon passing over the sun, and then Saturn, who are eventually going to conjoin. And I think with Mercury stationing direct also on the third, it does help us to have a little bit more clarity as to what needs to be changed, what needs to be
mm,
done. And this station happens simultaneously, within like 24 hours of the Saturn Cazimi. So there's something being brought into our consciousness where something clicks about what is sustainable, what we need to detach to, what binds us, what we're committed to, what provides longevity. And there's some sort of like eureka moment or just like aha moment of clarity we get of whatever the theme specifically Saturn is trying to change within the Aquarius part of our chart, because this is going to be, I think this is going to be the second and last Saturn Cazimi. Actually, no, I think there's one more. I think there is one more. Is in February of next year, right?
yeah, I think there is. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the second to last Saturn
Yeah.
Cazimi till like 20 like 50, 2060, whenever Saturn comes
Yeah.
back. We'll be old astrologers by then. We'll be elders by then.
True. Yeah, I think that that's a really good point right there, because we also see that the moon is going to be sextiling that Mercury at that time on the third, and then into the fourth we get that Cazimi. And so the moon likes to show our current understanding of like the heavens. She takes all of the light from all the other celestial bodies and transfers them to Earth. And so the idea is that we actually get this time of a new awareness and a new embodiment of awareness at the same time. And I like that a lot.
I totally love it. And I think it's interesting that Mars on the same day will sextile Jupiter, because the way I've been thinking about that is like, we might have to end things, or we might have to, bring things to a closure. But and I think that's also something that the Mars Jupiter sextile is showing us too. And in many ways, it's like, we're trying to get the most of what we can from something,
Mhm.
because this is the last time, this is going to be the last time that Mars will see Jupiter until they conjoin at the end of May too.
Yeah.
So Mars and Jupiter and they're both dignified too, which is kind of nice. I like that they're both in dignity and they're sextile each other. It makes me think of like getting some sort of support or some sort of help from like maybe a friend or someone who's trying to help you out in particular. Just because if you think about like the relationship of the planets to each other, Jupiter's in the third from Mars, and Mars is in the 11th from Jupiter.
Yeah, that benefic sextile really does show that there's this amicability and there's this friendliness between these two planets. I think that the fact that they're both dignified and they're going to both be dignified when they conjoin in Aries is a thing that shows that we have this constructive outlook, and we have this support from people that are also sharing that outlook. Two planets that are both interested in improvement, that in being constructive, in being where they want to be 2 years from now.
Yeah, and this is going to be like the closure of the Mars Jupiter cycle that opened up in the beginning of the pandemic in 2020 as well too. So like we're going to be closing that whole cycle up really up until May, because I think it's like May 24th or 25th or of this year when they actually will conjoin. And I think that's going to be very interesting, because then we're getting a new Mars Jupiter cycle. But it's funny because I think previously we actually had the Mars Jupiter conjunction happen first, because because Jupiter hasn't conjoined Saturn when this happened. And so now that Jupiter is past Saturn, Mars is going to meet Saturn first, then it's going to meet Jupiter. So I think of this as almost like Mars is getting some sort of optimism. Like when it like in 2020 when it can join Jupiter, or there's some sort of big like explosion or some sort of circumstance that happens, obviously pandemic, and then Mars gets to Saturn, so it's like going from benefic to malefic, where
Mhm.
Mars gets freedom, and then Mars gets restrained, whereas Mars gets restrained this time around, and then Mars gets freedom when it comes to conjoin Jupiter.
Yeah, definitely. And even the dignity of Jupiter being so drastically different, where we have
Yeah,
Jupiter in Capricorn versus Jupiter in Aries.
it'll be
This
the
is just,
square.
yeah, yeah, right. It's such a big difference that we're now moving forward and into rather than what we were kind of stuck with last time.
Yeah, I love the support between these two planets that comes in. And I think Saturday also becomes a really interesting day too, because the moon once it starts to enter Aries, it starts to, I mean, I think I think there's if there's any few days that are going to be important, it's definitely going to be on Tuesday and then on Saturday, because that's when the moon will obviously become a new moon on Tuesday and the first of the month. But then the moon will also now for the first time be able to see Saturn and the sun, who have just conjoined the day before. And it's interesting how the moon will also pass over Venus and Mars at the same time too, who are getting ready for the conjunction in the coming weeks. So we're getting like some stuff starting to build, like we're actually getting momentum start to build up moving forward into the beginning of the month, because we start off in the new moon, and then the moon's just increasing in light as we go on. So there's some purging towards the end of January, beginning of February, and then we start building light and building up to this full moon that'll come on in the 16th. But do you think we should look at the next week?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, perfect. Um, perfect. So on the second week of February, on the 7th, we get the moon making a sextile to Jupiter. It'll make a trine to Mars. It'll conjoin Uranus and then make another trine to Venus. On Tuesday, we get the moon then making a square to Saturn. It'll square the sun. And then Mars will make a trine to Uranus. And then the moon will make a trine to Mercury. The moon will then enter Gemini on Wednesday. On Thursday, the moon will make a square to Jupiter and then a trine to Venus. On Friday, that same trine theme will carry over, where the moon will make a trine to the sun. It's also the same day that Mercury conjoins Pluto, and then the moon will enter Cancer. On Saturday, the moon will then make a trine to Jupiter, but then make an opposition to Mars, and then the opposition to Venus will come on the next day on Sunday.
Yeah, so this week we actually didn't see as much as being an important month or a huge month with a bunch of different like planets coming together. Instead, we see a lot of the lunar aspects, which kind of just shows the fluctuations of daily life and how they wax and wane and go up and down and encounter different environments. And we're going to see that this actually builds into the third week, which is going to be a very, very active week.
Yeah, I think if there's anything to just note for this week is that Mercury conjoins Pluto for the third and final time. And I know I mean Mercury's actually on Pluto right now for the
Mhm.
second time. And I think it's been very interesting to see just like the Mercury Pluto stuff about talking about like hidden things, hidden
Mhm.
fears sometimes. Hidden stuff has come out in the news as well, like leaks or just like things going on like with trials and all that stuff. Also, we've seen like a lot of manipulation within like legislation as well, especially like in Florida. Like that's been a big thing that's happening. Like they're trying to pass a lot of like banning talking about like LGBT like stuff from school, and I'm like, what the fuck is this bullshit? And so we're seeing a lot of like this manipulation of even words. We see a lot of the time with Mercury Pluto, and so
Mhm.
I'm wondering if there's some sort of resolution that starts to come in by Friday to what was opened up with the Mercury retrograde cycle, really when Mercury entered shadow back on December 29th. So that was the first hit of Mercury to Pluto on December 29th. Then the second hit is actually today. And then the third hit will be on Friday the 11th. So I think that's going to be like a part of a closure to that Mercury um, Pluto dynamic that's been going on. But I think it's also interesting because um, Mercury is like I think in the process of becoming a morning star. I don't know when it commits phases. I don't. Do you know the exact day
I
or?
don't know the exact day, no.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know the exact day, but I know Mercury is going to eventually become visible. And one of the things I was thinking about is even though Pluto can't become visible because it's literally invisible in the sky, if you think of Mercury going from evening star to morning star as Mercury coming up from the underworld, if you bring the god of the underworld up with you, what does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. We see that the actual movement and visibility of the planet Mercury here is going to bring in those significations and carry them out of the beams of the sun with its actual visibility.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be like particularly important because I don't know, like Mercury, like that, like to me that just seems like so like if you think about it just like in a mythological way, you know, Pluto
Mhm.
stays in the underworld usually for most of the time.
Yeah.
Um, but why is Pluto coming up to the overworld now in the middle of February? Like what's going on? What does Pluto have to what I almost think of like Mercury as kind of like an agent or delivering the message of Pluto because Pluto can't like act on its own because it's not visible. But Mercury is there to kind of, I don't want to say carry the light, but Mercury is able to be a messenger for Pluto during this time period. And I think of this as like either something coming up that maybe was hidden or prolonged during the retrograde. There's something that comes up to the surface now, and we have to like deal with it in a different way because now Pluto isn't western of the sun. Pluto is actually eastern of the sun now. And I think it's gonna be very interesting to see what kind of information or news comes up during this time period because especially the Mercury is going to be highlighted because the moon will be in Gemini during this day too.
Yeah.
And then the moon will eventually go into Cancer later in the day as well too.
Yeah, and then with the next week when we have the full moon, we see more significations of things coming to light. And so that just kind of segues us into that third week of February.
Yeah. And on the third week, on Monday the 14th, Valentine's Day, we get the moon opposite Mercury. And it's funny because they oppose each other, but they're also both going to change signs on that day too. The moon will enter Leo, and then Mercury will enter Aquarius. And then on the next day, the moon will oppose Saturn. On Wednesday, we get the full moon. But first, before the full moon, we get Mars conjoining Venus. Then we get the full moon. And then on the same day, the moon will enter Virgo. The following day, the moon will then make an opposition to Jupiter. On that same day, Jupiter also sextiles Uranus, which is an interesting curveball. And then on Friday, the moon will trine Venus, it'll trine Mars, and then both of our luminaries get a shift in. They change signs on this day. So the sun will then enter Pisces, and Pisces season will begin, and then the moon will enter Libra. Then on Saturday, the moon will make a trine to Mercury. And then on Sunday, the moon will make a trine to Saturn, make a square to Venus, and then make a square to Mars.
Yeah, so I think that this is definitely probably the crux of the month. It's the most important piece where we have that full moon and everything we talked about with Mars conjoined Venus, but also the fact that this full moon is opposed Saturn in Aquarius, which is currently obscured by the sun, even though it's separating away from the sun. What we have here is a lot of those themes of things that are hidden and obscured that are happening on a foundational level. And so what we see here is with the moon conjoined that fixed star Regulus, like you mentioned, we have a lot of very interesting power dynamics taking place. Now, the fixed star Regulus is a very important fixed star that is of the nature of Mercury, of Mars and Jupiter. And so Mars and Jupiter, which we talked a lot about Mars and even its sextile to Jupiter. Here we see that the moon on that fixed star is going to bring about both of those qualities, but also with this Leo-like nature, because even though the fixed star is no longer actually in Leo, it's of the lion and it's actually the heart of the lion. And so what we have here is this actual engagement with things like royalty or structure or government or things that have a lot of weight and responsibility to them. And so everything that you were mentioning earlier when we were looking at the month as a whole, where we have this tension between the moon and the sun, the moon and Saturn, and then the moon on Regulus, is there is a lot of identity that has to be examined at this time.
Yeah, I think that's very important too, because one of the things we were talking about, like with Regulus, is that I mean, like think about like I'm wearing a gold chain right now. Like if anyone's wear gold or if anyone's worn jewelry, jewelry is fucking heavy. Like jewelry is not light and fluffy. And I think of having the moon on Regulus on top of a Venus like Mars conjunction, it almost makes it feel like this moon is very heavy because there's a lot of pressure and a weight to make some sort of decisions or to take some sort of action because as we said earlier, you know, Venus is coming down from its retrograde and now Mars is kind of like putting like pressure or applying pressure to Venus to be like, come on, you gotta, you know, get your shit in order. You gotta start moving. You gotta, start that project or start that thing or bring whatever you need to bring to culmination. There's a lot of pressure Venus is getting, especially around this time period. And I think the pressure is definitely going to be to choose yourself. And I don't think that's always an easy thing to do. But I think the full moon gives us enough courage to be able to do that because that's a big keyword with Mars is that it's courage. And, you know, when I think of like, what courage is as an adjective, as a behavior. What I just looked up in the dictionary is that it's the ability to face one's fears. And I think that's a big thing that Mars does in Capricorn, because Mars is not scared in Capricorn here. Mars is not timid. Mars is ready to be the Dark Knight, pretty much. And
True.
Mars is ready to take on Thanos. Mars is ready to Mars is ready. Mars, this is the time. If there's a time that says the time is now, Mars is like, the time to act is now. And I think one of the things that we stressed about this full moon is that, yes, Mars conjoins Venus, moon's on Regulus. When you throw this into the mix, that the moon is at the north bending of the nodes. And essentially just what that means is that the nodes essentially are there's a lot of information on the nodes online, but what I like to give as like a primer is that the nodes are just the intersection of the moon's orbit around Earth and the sun's apparent orbit around Earth, or like the ecliptic. And those 2 points where they intersect, they are the north and south node, but the points that square them in the zodiac, so if there's the points that square the nodes in the zodiac, are the north and south bending. And so because we have the north node in Taurus by this time period, the north bending would be in Leo, and then the south bending would be in Aquarius, where currently Saturn is right now. But having a full moon at the north bending of the nodes, it's really interesting, because I think I don't really work with the bendings too much, but with the knowledge I do have, there is something that is being increased, or I almost want to say like the word dramatized, that's coming up, where there is a lot of pressure. And it's, if you think about where the moon is when it's at the north bending of the node, the moon is pretty much at the zenith almost. It's not completely at the zenith, but it's very high in latitude in the sky. And if you have a moon that is very bright overhead, you have a moon that is completely full, and you have a moon that is on the heart of the lion, this is looking at us and as individuals and as of, people in our fullest and our most authentic, and for everyone to see. I think this is definitely like I don't know, you can't hide from this full moon because it's just so bright, it's so high in the sky. And when we add this mix on top of it too, Jupiter is getting ready to set under the beams. I'm looking at it right now. It's the next day. Jupiter enters the beams on the 17th. So Jupiter is disappearing in the sky. Saturn's disappeared in the sky. And all we have is the lesser malefic and the lesser benefic coming to conjoin. So I think that imagery of both Jupiter and Saturn disappearing is very interesting, because Jupiter is now getting ready to end its cycle, and some sort of faith is being purged, some sort of belief, or maybe some sort of outlook or vision or dream that we had is being purged, or even some sort of illusion sometimes too, because I know Neptune is getting ready to, even though Neptune isn't visible, Neptune will enter the beams. And I think that, especially with this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, it brings like a lot of, I don't want to say delusion, but it does. And I think this is a moment where we get to see something very clearly during the full moon, because we realize there's a lack of something, where something has gone or something's missing, particularly with with the Jupiter and Saturn themes.
Yeah, and everything you said about fear definitely relates to that Saturn, where Saturn is supposed to be a planet of fear, and it's being, just like it's in a full moon opposite the moon, we have the planet Saturn is at the lowermost bending. It's at the southern bending. And so it's actually in this place of deepness, darkness, because it's obscured by the sun. We have this really deep rooted Saturn. And so that can be like a subconscious kind of fear, or an internal fear, something not seen, but something really deep rooted and habitual, because Saturn's so slow moving. You get used to Saturn's movement. You get used to these kind of thought patterns. And I think that Jupiter, like you said, about being about beliefs, can also be about philosophy or thought patterns or worldview. And so what we have here is this removal of fear and this changing of worldview, when the moon is going to really expose a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, this moon's not playing around, especially
No.
because the last aspect before it comes to the sun is Saturn. So
Yeah.
this moon is really illuminating a lot. And I think I love what you said. You're like, yeah, it's where our thought patterns are changing, our belief patterns are changing, what we place faith in. And I think faith has a lot to do with how we identify with something. And I think that talks a lot about like Sagittarius ruling a fire sign, that, when we identify with something, we're attracted to it and we put our faith in it, we believe in it. And I think there is something that I think that's a big thing, especially with the moon and Leo. We're realizing what is the truth of whether it be our identity or what we identify with, and how the world around us may or may not reflect that same internal feeling of understanding and knowingness of who we are and of ourselves at the same time too.
Yeah, the moon really speaks to an environment as a whole. And so what's really interesting is when we see that the moon is in a tense configuration with the sun, we see that there's this difference between our soul, our spirit, and our environment. And so the moments where we can actually initiate change in that environment is when we have that full moon, where it's like, okay, now I can see there's me and there's my environment and what needs to change, what needs to be adapted. And you can choose to continue adapting yourself. And the sun is actually in its detriment, it's in Aquarius, and so you can keep on sacrificing yourself, or you can actually change that environment, one that will support yourself and support your spirit, support your sun and those solar qualities.
Totally. And I think the big thing about this as well is that there's because it's on Regulus, there's a lot of responsibility to take action here. And I know that's something we wrote down, like we were talking about, like there's a lot of responsibility for how you present yourself, or a lot of responsibility for identity too. And what you choose, to do, your actions have impact. And I think that there's much more awareness of the impact our actions have during this time period, because we really feel the magnitude of the spotlight.
Definitely. Should we look at the next week?
Yeah, let's take a look at the next week. I mean, also before we do that though, the sun will also enter Pisces, and then the moon enters Libra as well too, and then we actually go into next week with Pisces season as the backdrop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be very interesting too, because now the sun isn't going to be as challenged. The sun is like coming from. It's interesting because they call this part of the month in the Chinese zodiac the Great Cold. So this it kind of makes sense for like Aquarius season in the Western calendar. So we're coming from a sun who's in the sign of its exile, or the sign of its detriment, or its antithesis, where it's not really familiar with this environment. The sun is very hot and it's very fiery, and it has its domicile in Leo as the middle of summer. But in Aquarius, this is the middle of winter, where things are very cold. There's snowstorms. The sun doesn't have as much impact to exert its heat on the world, or at least unless one part of the hemisphere. And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the sun has a dignity shift now, because the sun no longer feels exiled, and the sun is kind of like just walking through Pisces, a little bit peregrine here. But it is definitely, I wouldn't say it's an increase in dignity, but situations get less, like we feel less exiled, or we feel less alienated in some sort of way, because the sun's no longer going to be in the sign.
Yeah, and I think that that was actually something that with this full moon, the full moon where we are looking at our environment and whether it supports us or not, we see that when we take action, we then see that the environment will shift to be less detrimental to our own innate spirit.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how like we're getting like the sun and Saturn being heavily highlighted with like the Aquarius Leo energy, and then we go to like Jupiter Venus being really highlighted, because the sun enters Jupiter's sign, but it's also Venus's exaltation, and then the moon enters Venus's sign, and then it's literally like the day before, like we said, Jupiter enters the beams on the 17th. And so it's through this next week that we go into, we're really purging out a lot of like the Jupiter faith, changing our worldview, changing our perspective. I think one of the things that's very interesting is that also maybe we're having a change in, the people we want to be around, groups of people, friends, people who lift our spirits. Maybe they don't lift our spirits in the same way that they did before. And so now we have to, think about. I think of when a planet is under the beams, it's something being brought into our consciousness, because it's so close to the sun, being representative of the mind. And I'm thinking of this as like, we really get to question and examine, what, again, like as we go into this next week and even going into March, because the Kazimi will be on March 5th. We really get to understand what is it that lifts our spirits? What is it that we feel energized by? What do we feel inspired by? There's a lot of questioning about if the environment really supports what the spirit wants.
Yeah, definitely. And a classical signification of Jupiter is your allies. And so what we see here is that, are your allies actually embodying what it means to be supportive and as a support supportive influence in your life, or are they not? And so that examination is going to be a fiery road. It's going to be, the sun is actually going to burn up Jupiter and evaluate. It's judging from this, kind of state of power, because the sun has the ability to obscure every other planet. That means that the sun has this royalty, this responsibility. And so we see that kind of power can overwhelm a planet, and that can be overwhelming to some of our worldview, but it is also to kind of reimagine and reinvigorate those planets so that they have the creative influence that they need to then go out and be supportive in our lives.
Totally. Yeah, as we go into I think this is the final week of February. On Monday, the moon will enter Scorpio. It'll make a trine to the sun. It'll make a square to Mercury. Then it'll make a trine to Jupiter on Tuesday, making a square to Saturn, but then coming with some relief for making a sextile to Venus and Mars. As we head into Wednesday, the moon will then make it'll start to enter Sagittarius. It'll also be the same day that Mars makes a sextile to Neptune. On that day, the luminaries are in discord and in disagreement as the moon will square the sun. And then on Thursday, the moon will make a sextile to Mercury, make a square to Jupiter. Venus will sextile Neptune. The moon will sextile Saturn, and then Mercury squares Uranus. On Friday, the moon will then enter Capricorn. On Saturday, the moon will make a nice sextile to the sun and Jupiter, highlighting a lot of the Jupiter Cazimi action going on. And then as we go into the end of the week, on Sunday, the moon will conjoin Mars, it'll conjoin Venus, and it'll conjoin Pluto, and then it'll make its exit into Aquarius.
Yeah, so this is definitely going to be a month that just carries out everything we've talked about. So it's putting those things in motion. And of course, we could go into each day and the applications of the moon, the separations of the moon, and the different influx of quality that we're going to experience. Things like the luminaries being in discord on Wednesday. That is always going to be a little bit more of a challenging day. I know I personally always avoid starting or initiating anything when the luminaries are in a harsh aspect. But of course, you could then look at something like Saturday, where the sun and moon are in a lovely sextile, and that's going to be paired by the sextile with Jupiter. And so something like that is definitely a little bit more of a favorable day to start new ventures and to implement some of the ideas we've been working on. And so you can kind of see that there's going to be those fluctuations throughout the week.
Yeah, I think this week does get a little bit more tricky as the moon enters Scorpio on Monday, just because
Yeah.
the moon and Scorpio transits are going to be heavily colored by the South Node now.
Mhm.
And the South Node earlier this week, the South Node did not come to play with me in my sixth house, because I swear I was not eating, I was not drinking water, I was like a literal walking zombie. The day before the moon squared Saturn, which I think was like Tuesday. I think it was either Tuesday or Monday, and I was just so depleted of energy, so drained, so tired. And I think if there's anything I can recommend for this end of the week, is that, especially because the moon is losing light and the moon is decreasing in light, it's really important to just rejuvenate, rest, especially as like during the winter. I think that's kind of like a challenging part of winter season, is that the moon is going to be fallen while losing light whenever it's like Aquarius season. So it's definitely very important to just, take care of your body, take care of your health, and to, not push yourself, not overwork yourself, and provide yourself with, what you need to just function. Because I was not doing that on Monday. But this week is definitely, like, I don't want to say cool down week, but it's almost like everything is getting released in a way, because the moon is like losing light. So it's like we're like either expending energy or, getting rid of something, or coming from the cool down finally from the week. And then it's interesting how the moon will then come to pass over on Sunday. It'll pass over Mars and Venus and Pluto, who are actually getting ready to conjoin. I think they conjoin the following week. Yeah, they will conjoin Pluto on Thursday on the following week. And I know that probably is going to set up a lot of that's going to set up a lot of stuff coming up in that'll set up a lot of stuff coming in March, the beginning of March, where I think the Mars, Venus, Pluto stuff is almost kind of like like, I want to, oh my God, how do I say? It's almost kind of like some sort of passion or some sort of fire, some sort of situation is being, there's undertones of manipulation, there's undertones of power dynamics and control. And one of the things that's very important about Venus and Mars is that, we'll talk about this in March, but the thing about Venus and Mars is that Mars is leading Venus kind of into a trap.
Mhm.
because when Venus goes into Aquarius and conjoins Mars, Venus is like, yes, I got you. And then Mars is like, look, you're besieged between me and Saturn now. And there's almost this, Venus is kind of like between a rock and a hard place where she's receiving a lot of pressure from both Saturn and from Mars. And I think that this is going to be very interesting on how to this leads up into the next into this week, because that's going to set up a lot of what goes on for the beginning of March and even next week, because next Sunday Mars and Venus will then enter Aquarius. Um, and it's very interesting. I know you wanted to talk about the last day of the month because I know that was important too for you.
Yeah, which that whole week really bleeds into our next month. But what we have on the 28th, this very last day of February, is the moon will actually conjoin Mercury and Saturn. And I really like that day, in fact, because what we have is a complete culmination of everything we talked about in this month. And the moon's going to actually come to that Mercury, which we saw station direct earlier in the month. But now Mercury is going to be in Aquarius, where he's going to be dignified by triplicity. It's going to be very fast in motion, and it's going to be received by Saturn. And so what we see here is that our mercurial things, our communication, our thought process, the work that we've been doing, the studies we have, anything that we're actually like having a project with, that's going to be starting to actually pick up speed moving forward, have resources, have dignity, and then it's there for the long haul because it's applying to be received by Saturn. And so when the moon meets these two planets, it's really bringing everything together and embodying all of the things that we've been working on and want to set into motion for a very long time to come. And so this is a very good time in the month to release the things we've been working on throughout the month.
Totally. And I love that you're saying like this is going to be something that launches into like plans that we're making for like the future.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that happens on the final week that is not listed here,
Mhm.
but on Saturday the 26th, this is actually going to be when Saturn starts to enter its shadow. So
Mm.
Saturn will get to 18 degrees of Aquarius. And when a planet enters shadow in the pre-shadow phase, it's going to start moving over the degrees of the zodiac that it's going to eventually retrograde over when that planet will station retrograde. So Saturn's retrograde, I think, is like June 3rd or June 4th. So from February 26th up until the beginning of June, Saturn is going to be trying to lay foundation or lay structure down. And whatever Mercury is bringing to Saturn, it's almost kind of like Mercury is like bringing like, here's your blueprint, here's your details of what you're going to be building, here's the details of what you're going to be constructing. And Saturn's like, okay, time to put all these into effect. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Saturn does enter shadow at the end of the month, because that's going to characterize not only what happens in March, but it's also going to characterize, the next few months on Saturn and shadow, trying to bring some sort of structures, trying to bring something into form, but then maybe realizing midway through the year that something, isn't probably wasn't as what we thought it was, or maybe there needs to be some revisions or changes or plan or revisions to the way we implement structure in our lives, and bring something into like form or stability with that Saturn. So I think it's very spicy that Saturn, and also it's Saturn's day too. So
Yeah.
Saturn's entering shadow on Saturn's day, which is very interesting.
Yeah, this is really connected to the rest of the year, especially the next 6 months.
Yeah, because Saturn will station direct. I think it's on October 23rd. It's like in that crazy week in October
Yeah.
when everything like Saturn stations direct, there's a solar eclipse, Mars
Mhm.
stations retrograde, Jupiter re-enters Pisces, Venus cazimi, back to back within a 7-day period. So and it, like what we said earlier, like Mars in Capricorn is mirroring a lot of that Mars retrograde stuff going on, because they're in the sign that's like contra antitia to each other. So it's a lot of what February is bringing up is an opening for what the next of the year is going to be coming. But the opening only comes through after purging and after taking sort of action to make those changes to our environment.
Yeah, there's seeds being planted now that will really take shape at the end of the year.
Yeah, and it's gonna be 2022 is like a wild year, honestly. I mean,
Really.
in Chinese astrology, it's the year of the tiger, so
Mhm.
it's water tiger. So I'm pretty sure it's a yang water year. So they say like yang water is water that is like very active or very like rushing or moving water, like waves, like rain, like all of like like yeah, waves, rain, rivers, like running water, all these things. So I'm wondering if like water might also be really relevant coming up just for the year. Like I think of the years like like riding the waves of really riding the waves of Saturn, riding the waves of Jupiter, riding the waves of Mars, all of these things.
And the eclipses, you know.
And the like, riding the waves of the fucking Taurus Scorpio eclipses that
Yeah.
come up, like yeah, it's gonna be an insane year. And I think that February gives us it gives us a lot of sobering to think about. It does feel a lot sobering and grounding to think about what it is actually sustainable in our lives, because at this time the Saturn is at the south bending of the nodes, and so there's definitely a decrease in the Saturnian that comes up this year, where maybe there's structure that's falling apart, structure that's brittle, and we really have to, it's almost like we have to like get to the root of our issues. We have to go down deep. And so there's important, like the contrast of highs and lows becomes really relevant, especially around the full moon, because you get the moon who's like, again, not at the zenith, but is very high in the sky. Then you get Saturn who's very low in the very low too, which is that contrast of high and low is very interesting. It
Yeah.
can be like when you're at the lowest of lows, especially because the sun will be at the south bending. Like when you're at
Mhm.
the lowest of low, what's illuminated to show you a way out of it in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And even those contrasts between light and dark and the things that we have hidden and the things we want
Yeah.
more exposed, you know.
Yeah. Do you have any other? Oh yeah, I forgot there's something we also need to talk about at the Mars Venus conjunction, as if it couldn't get even more crazier. Um, they're also the rulers of the nodes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think having it being the rulers of the nodes is also interesting too. I'm not really sure what to expect with that right now. I expect this to be something more martial though, because Mars kind of has the upper hand here.
Mhm.
Since the South Node's ruled by Mars. Mars is exalted. I guess it has like the greater dignity over Venus, even though Venus by the day has better triplicity. Even by night, it probably has better triplicity too. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how the nodes can join, because it brings an important like turning point into the nodal cycle of the Venus, of the Taurus Scorpio eclipses that'll be taking place not only this year but also next year as well.
Yeah, and Mars is definitely winning both by his speed, because we also notice that he's going to be able to implement his wants a lot more fast and with a lot more precision, while Venus is taking her time, a little bit more methodical, and just getting things done slowly. And then also when we look at phase, we see that Mars is actually increasing in light and increasing in his phase, while we actually have a waning Venus. And so there's actually a bit of a boost towards Mars for sure.
Yeah, definitely, because Venus is going to start to go into the sun, which guess what? It happens the same day, around the same day time Saturn stations direct. Venus is
Yeah.
literally. I think it's like the 20. I think it's the 22nd of October. Venus conjoins the Sun in Libra, which is also important too, because there hasn't been a Venus Sun conjunction in Libra since like the 1700s.
Yeah.
And there's so much to go over with that, but we'll get into that later in the year.
Yeah.
But I think it's like the South Node is definitely being highlighted a lot during this, especially because it's the Venus Mars conjunction, and Mars is getting what it wants, and which is to purge things, to let things go. I think of the South Node as well as like a water filter, because it's
Mhm.
like it filters out all like the shitty stuff, and then it kind of leaves you with the water, but it has to kind of take out the toxins or things of that nature. Like I
Yeah.
think a very interesting like Mars South Node story that I have is that when Mars conjoined the South Node in Sagittarius later last year, so I moved into my new house here in Florida, and I had this drain in my tub. Couldn't figure out how to open the drain. I literally could not figure out how to open this drain. And I kind of just sat through the entire summer with like, I would just be in the shower and the water would like come up to my ankles, and then I'd be like, just going back, taking out the shower and everything. And I just couldn't. The only reason I couldn't like clear the drain is because I didn't know how to open it, because there was no like opening that I could see. And so I just kind of went through the summer, just, I was like, when it comes to me, it'll come to me. So the day the Mars South Node conjunction comes, and I find out that there's this screw underneath, like in the pipe, literally, that I have to like do some crazy shit to kind of unscrew. And I do it and I take the shit off, and I'm literally clearing my drain from all this hair, all this grime. It was completely disgusting. But it's such a Mars South Node like transit where it's like clearing something out or purging something, and it's very funny or like clear or eliminating any obstacles that prevent you from purging something. And it's actually really funny because like Mars in the South Node, like it's really interesting for the South Node to be in Scorpio, because in the Vedic tradition, South Node is actually really hot. Like the Vedic tradition considers the South Node to be a very hot like force, whereas Rahu, the North Node, tends to be a lot more colder, because in some schools of thought they say Rahu is like Saturn, whereas Ketu is like Mars. So I think that's very interesting too, how I don't know, like there's just more passion exploding here
Yeah,
when it comes
definitely.
up. Yeah, do you have any other like thoughts about the month? Because I think we went through the majority of it.
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job. Can't think of anything off the top of my head, but we kind of just have those highs and lows, and I think that the nodes representing high and low and going up and going down, we have those things coming together with that Venus and Mars conjunction.
Yeah, it's also really funny because Mars is kind of like driving Venus towards the like it's interesting because Mars is pushing Venus in the beginning of the month towards the south bending, actually, because I think they won't conjoin at the south bending, but they'll be in Aquarius, which is the south bending of the node. So it's almost like Mars is trying to push the ruler of whatever the north node is trying to increase into the south bending, and Mars does it successfully.
Yeah.
I know Bonatti says that the North Node in Taurus, the rich should be careful of their money, or the rich would lose money, or something of that nature. And I think there's going to be a lot of attacks on like, wealth, or, people who like corporations who have like large sums of money, like that. I think we're going to find that there's a lot of like financial just like loss that might come in with that. With whatever the North Node is trying to expand, there's a brief period of loss that comes in when throughout February and March.
Yeah, and even the star Regulus and everything we talked about with the full moon, Regulus representing this huge increase, but then also the potential for a complete downfall. We can definitely see that with something being overinflated and then it not having a solid foundation or not even being warranted, and that even falling apart. I think about Donald Trump, who has Regulus on his ascendant, and we can see something gets really blown out of proportion and lifted all the way up and then torn down because it did not have what it needed to be. There was no basis, there was no foundation, there was no rationale. It was just it exploded and then toppled down. So
yeah, Regulus, the higher the high, the deeper the fall. I think I forgot how it goes, but it's when you take the Regulus part of it into consideration, it's even crazier, because there is I don't know, it seems like a very pressurized month. There's a lot of force to make decisions, to take action, and to move forward. I think ultimately there's a period, and I think that's one of the things I want to stress with Venus as well too, is that I just tweeted this out, that like Venus is like now direct, and now that Mercury is also here too, like joining the party in Capricorn for like that first half of the month, and then Mars is here. It's like in the Capricorn part of our chart, there might have been some sort of delay that was there with Venus. And it's actually really funny because I was going through with the client like stuff that happened in the past for her, and it was very interesting how when Venus stationed direct, there was like this issue she was going through, and then when Venus stationed direct, there was something that was like that happened for her, that she couldn't put it off any longer, or she couldn't wait any longer, because now this planet is direct and it won't move backwards again, it won't move slow again. And now Mars is like, Mars is creating more urgency, more action, and more like need to initiate, taking care of any like delays or revisions that happened in the Capricorn part of our chart. And especially with Mercury there too, there's a kind of a wild card that gets thrown in there where you're like, oh, I didn't know about this.
There's definitely a lot of momentum, forward momentum.
Yeah, it's a lot of forward momentum, and
which is hard to slow down. It's hard to stop. You have to just go with it. It's one thing even too with Capricorn, and Capricorn being linked to like a mountaintop. Oftentimes what we have is almost like, I think of a biker and they're going down on a mountain trail, and you can't stop. Like there's literally no way to stop, but you have to just be smart in the way that you keep on going.
Yeah, you're like skiing or like down a mountain in some way. And yeah, I love biking down hills and mountains. When I used to live in New York, I would bike all the way. For anyone who like lives in New York or knows anything, I would bike up Washington Heights, which is like this. Oh my God, Washington Heights is so like I don't know why I used to bike up there. I guess I was just bored. I would just bike up this huge ass hill. Then I would ride it all the way down. I think it was from like 170th Street up until I think it's like 151st, because then there's another hill. And then I went down that hill from like 151st all the way to 125th. And then hills are just so fun to ride down, but you really can't like stop. You just have to ride in the wind. And I think that like more resistance to like stepping on the brakes, I don't know, it might cause more damage than harm to abruptly brake in the middle of your path when there is some sort of pressing situation that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, definitely. There's a call and a necessity for flexibility so that you can continue that forward momentum, because you can't just stop it. It's like if you have a train, if the front car like stops suddenly, then the whole train will just collapse because you can't stop the rest. And so you want to keep things going and you want to go forward. And so strategizing about how you want things to look and where you want them to be is what you have to start doing so that you can direct yourself. And that, that really just calls apart our time, and time itself, we can't stop, and it's going forward and there's momentum. And so, finding what things you want to have implemented by a certain date, making goals, making milestones and benchmarks, and then trying to meet them is just kind of the call of February.
Totally. And Saturn says to be very realistic about what you're doing too.
Yeah.
And Saturn's like, and I think like, even though there's a lot of forward momentum, this is not something that needs to be rushed. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And even though, we're biking down a hill in some instance, you still have to kind of get a lay of the land. Mars, especially in Capricorn, needs to know the terrain it needs to know the terrain of the mountain that it's about to climb up on and then ride back down.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have any other final thoughts or no?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah. Do you have anything going on or anything that you want to like promote or like just talk about talk about?
Not currently. I'm still seeing clients, and I've been pretty swamped with some client work, but I do actually have some more openings for all of February. So now that I've gotten through what I had booked for January, I'm pretty open.
Yeah, I think everyone should go book with you, because I'm booked out for February. I'm booked out for February. So I think if anyone's looking to see a brilliant astrologer who is incredibly talented, incredibly funny, and wants to have a great conversation about their chart, go see Liam. And as for me, what I'm doing, well, I just have the week ahead of forecast that I'm doing. I have clients booking into March at this point, so I'm a little drowned in work right now. So I don't know, just subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the YouTube, come for the monthly Astro updates, come for the weekly Astro updates, and I'll be here delivering the news as I was directed by Mercury to in my nativity.
I love that.
Yeah. So well, thank you for joining me again, Liam. And I'll be excited to talk to you on next month about March, which is going to be kind of like a continuation of February in a way.
Definitely. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, take care, everyone, and have a fun March. No, fun February. Fun February.